everyone. Welcome to Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. This is our last planned Q&A / discussion for Com 101. And I thought we'd wrap up with a feel-good movie. So I know that a lot of the movies that I've chosen haven't really strictly been defined as rom-coms the way that like maybe Sleepless in Seattle is, or You've Got Mail. But I do think that these movies count as rom-coms and count as part of the survey of rom-coms. So it's important to not just watch the movies like Sleepless in Seattle, which are important. And if I'd had more time, maybe we would have watched Pretty Woman or something like that, because that did have a huge impact on mainstream romantic comedies. But I thought that having more of a scope of rom-coms in general, just the way that the genre can bend and reflects on itself, and sort of understanding that rom-coms mean a bunch of different things. It's not just You've Got Mail, but it's also capable of something sweet like Can't Buy Me Love, or something catchy. I don't want to catchy isn't the right word, but something sort of poppy and pastiche like Down with Love, as well as something more introspective and it's complex on purpose. I think that most rom-coms are complex, but this movie really emphasizes the complexity. That's one of the things that defines it. So the complexity of Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. And this was also not the only movie to do that. There were a lot of movies in the aughts, in the late 90s, in the early aughts, and a little bit later, that sort of looked at romance and movies and sort of tried to deconstruct the sort of stories and narratives that we tell ourselves. The other one I'm thinking about right now is 500 Days of Summer. So I often think about 500 Days and Eternal Sunshine in the same spectrum, I guess. They both sort of have an interest in looking at romantic comedies, and they're very different movies, I think, with very different messages, but they sort of you can see how they sort of come from the same era of indie films. So if you have any or any discussion topics or anything, I'm clearly open, and we can also talk about all the different movies. If the spectrum of movies that we've watched as a whole, I guess, if we have any finishing thoughts on that side. I do think Eternal Sunshine is a really good, interesting movie. I think a lot of them are good, but I like the ambiguity of the ending, because it sort of positions the viewer into questioning not whether the relationship is going to last, but if the way that the characters view relationships sort of shifts, and whether these characters are good for each other. The way that the characters grow is through sort of letting go of themselves. And it's interesting how that sort of plays out, and the way that I'm trying to think of the right way. I think I might think of it a little differently this time. I used to think of this movie as these characters are sort of not meant. These characters are meant for each other, but it's not really certain whether it's a good thing or not, because they might be stuck in this cycle over and over and over again. And clearly, by the end of the movie, the cycle is broken, so they can't just like go erase the relationship again. But it kind of seems that these characters, these people, are stuck in these patterns, and it's sort of inescapable who you're attracted to, even if it's a bad idea. So Mary still being attracted to Howard and having a crush on him, or like being in love with him, that happens again, even losing all her memories of him. So it's sort of like the person that you're attracted to is inevitable,
And it's kind of looking at it that way is sort of a depressing, you don't really get a choice in anything. But there's also the choice of, I'm attracted to this person, but they like drive me insane and they have shortcomings, they have flaws and everything. But like what I'm going to do, I'm just going to say, okay, like I understand that's what a relationship is. And so these characters are sort of, there's something inevitable about these characters, and it could be a good thing and it could be a bad thing. So that's sort of what I like about this movie, is that it takes the sort of inevitable meet cute fate angle that a lot of romantic comedies have and a lot of romantic comedies trade on, and it really interrogates that and looks into, well, if these characters are fated to be together and if they're meant to be together in this way, like what does that actually mean, and what are the downsides of that, because it's not always a positive thing. And yeah, if you guys want to chip in. And I guess the other, let's talk about rom-coms. One of the things is that I've been watching a whole lot of a show called The Saint, which has nothing to do with rom-coms. And so my brain is very much in Saint mode right now. But I can always switch over to talking about Eternal Sunshine. Let's see. I also think the part about authenticity is interesting, because Patrick does try to recreate these moments that Joel had with Clementine naturally, and that we also get to see the natural progression of their relationship even without the background. So with that, I mean, like in the first time that Joel and Clementine meet, they both have all their memories, and so they have, Joel makes the Huckleberry Hound joke. So they're sort of in possession of like all these faculties or memories, and so that kind of comes very naturally. And then later on, when they meet again and they don't have their memories of each other, they still sort of build this rapport, even so it's not based on what the characters know. It's they would like each other regardless of whether Joel made the Huckleberry Hound joke, is the idea. But Patrick thinks, no, what Clementine liked about Joel was that he made this joke, or that he said this thing, or that that he gave her this jewelry. And that is sort of part of it, but the other part of it is that they're just attracted to each other through it's not through the things they do, obviously, it's through their personality. So regardless of the situation that they're in, they'll make it work and they'll like each other. And so anything that Joel says is the right thing to say because it's Joel saying it, versus Patrick trying to retread that ground. When I'm also interested, what's also significant to me is that it what's also significant to me is the way that the Patrick stuff felt, the way that the movie made the Patrick things feel forced. And obviously the audience feels that it's wrong anyway, because Patrick is basically a psychopath. But the way that the moments themselves don't have any emotion in them, and compared to the way that the Joel and Clementine scenes do have emotion in them. And so the way that the movie tried to conveys that is really interesting to me from like a technical standpoint. But it's a really interesting contrast. So someone's saying that the view of romance seemed jaded, and that there's a Groundhog Day quality to it. So they're just going to go through the same misery again, which I agree. That's a little bit of what I was talking about with like whether they're fated to go through all this again, and whether they're just going to cycle again, whether it's just going to be the same issues and problems over and over again, which is true. I think what they agree to at the end is that they're agreeing to it. So they're just like, if that happens or when that happens, I'm okay with that happening, because So I think it is jaded in the sense that it doesn't really believe that romance will save you. And a lot of the characters sort of believe this, and the movie sort of says no, it's more mundane than that. So Clementine won't save Joel, and Joel won't be saved by this love, but he does love someone. And I do think that it's it's interesting that they're not willing, that they're set up to go through this whole thing again, but they won't have that outlet of being able to erase themselves from their memory. So we don't know if they're going to break up again and then get back together. We have no idea. But they sort of both agree to not be happy, but to accept each other, and the way that they feel about the relationship. And sort of, I think the main idea is sort of to enjoy it while it's happening and not worry so much about where it's going. Is the director saying that about these two people, or general comment on romance? It feels like a general comment on romance, mostly because Mary also falls in love with Howard again, and they go through the same thing again. And so it's not just these two people who like go through the entire thing. It's more that everyone, even if you erase someone from your memory, you're just going to fall for them again. So the first time I saw it in the film class, it was talking about the deconstruction of the manic pixie dream girl, which I think is also kind of true, although that's sort of also unfairly. I think a lot of these movies, like Eternal Sunshine and 500 Days of Summer, they're kind of in conversation with this idea of a manic pixie dream girl. But I think it's unfair to like call it a movie about a manic pixie, because I think having this kind of character, I think there are some people like this. I think saying I think it's, I don't know. She's very much, I think people call her a manic pixie dream girl, but she very specifically doesn't want to be seen as a manic pixie dream girl. She has that whole speech that she prepares because she wants people to treat her like a person. I kind of have, I personally have sort of an issue, not an issue, but like I want to push back against people saying that any female character with a personality and a sense of adventure slash like fun, like humor, is a manic pixie dream girl. Joel definitely felt that way about her. And you could say that Tom felt that way about Summer, but I feel like 500 Days is much more specific deconstruction of that impulse in Tom in seeing Summer as a manic pixie dream girl, and this movie is more of saying that like, yeah, the manic pixie dream girl isn't going to fix your relationship, like the fun, like that Hannah was saying, isn't going to like save you from that relationship. Sorry, I'm trying to like finish my thought and then read. So like even if you're agreeing with me, I'm trying to like get through the whole thing, because if I'm just like talking directly to the conversation, then it becomes really fragmented if you ever like go back and watch it. So I'm glad that you're agreeing with me, and I think that we're probably on the same page. And like I definitely agree, but saying that that's a trope that's in conversation because it was a super popular trope during the era the movie was made, which is absolutely true. And yes, I agree with you. And it's interesting because I think I've seen more movies with a deconstruction of the manic pixie dream girl than I've seen movies with. I mean, I saw Garden State, but the thing about good, I don't know, manic pixie dream girls is that they're not actually, it's a lot about like what men project on them, and not about who they actually are. And most movies I've seen are about that versus actually like being that idea of like what men think manic pixie dream girls are.
I'm trying to think of like actual movies like that, but maybe I just don't watch them for obvious reasons. Yeah, so this movie is definitely a deconstruction of that, and I think it's sort of a deconstruction of this idea of fated relationships in general. And yeah, I guess it's interesting to think about the way this movie, because I'm trying to think about it in relation to the other movies we've watched, right? Because in The Awful Truth, well, the first movie we watched, if we can think all the way back to the very first movie, we watched, what was the first thing that we watched? It was Singing in the Rain was the second week, and then I should just have my syllabus out. But if we think about The Awful Truth, then those characters are very matched, and they're also very destructive towards each other. And you could theoretically make Design for Living, correct? You could theoretically make the argument that they're just gonna fall apart in the same way that Clementine and Joel sort of fall apart. But you get this feeling that they don't, because like they've worked through their issues, and we haven't seen Clementine and Joel do that yet, but we get the sense that they're willing to try to do it. But I think it's exposing this idea that you have in a lot of romantic comedies, where when the couples get together at the end, it's sort of like, well, what's preventing them from having another cycle like this? Because if you, at the end of, Design for Living, they sort of Design for Living is all about working through their issues and like coming to a conclusion. It's a perfect movie, and it's a great romantic comedy. And Singing in the Rain is sort of that false ending of like she's mad at him for 5 minutes, but they actually have a really good relationship. In my opinion, I know that we talked about how he didn't really do a very nice thing to her at the very end, but I sort of see that as an anomaly versus the rest of the representation of their relationship. And they were Singing in the Rain, and then we also watched, if you want to talk about Never Been Kissed, there's no way that relationship lasts until they like past getting off the baseball field. So there's this it's sort of exposing this romantic notion, or this false romantic notion, that a lot of romantic comedies display of whether these characters will actually work off screen. And I get more of a sense that the characters in Eternal Sunshine will, because they actually interrogated those issues and they actually addressed them in the movie itself, instead of leaving. And the movie is actually about how they're working through those issues. So it's not it's not a movie of remarriage, although you could maybe make that argument. But it's, actually it kind of is a movie of remarriage. But the remarriage isn't through like wacky hijinks. It's through doing the emotional work of realizing that this person is important to you and like wanting to hold on to that relationship. And so I think it's a really interesting examination of that sort of trope and that belief that pops up in American rom-coms all the time. I don't know if any of that made sense, but hopefully it did. Yeah, so it's, and the other, so another thing that happened like around this time with the Manic Pixie Dream Girls and 500 Days of Summer and things like that is that movies started deconstructing romantic comedies. And one of the things that I didn't particularly like, I liked this movie a lot, but it sort of became in fashion to be really cynical about love and really cynical about romantic comedies, sort of portraying them as unrealistic,
and fantastical, and that it's more mature to have like complex, depressed feelings than to enjoy something like like Can't Buy Me Love or I've Never Been Kissed and something like that. And I think it's I think that's kind of not a fault of this movie, but that's sort of a shame in general, because there haven't been a lot of particularly good romantic comedies. There have been a couple, but the romantic comedies as a genre has sort of been in decline for a while. I think it's picking back up again. I mean, there was a lot of love for To All the Boys I Loved Before, which is a much more traditional romantic comedy. I think a lot of the people who made romantic comedies sort of became of two minds, or the creative behind it is the two minds, and one of them is like How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days, and they're sort of not interesting in the way that classic romantic comedies are interesting because the characters don't feel like they fully exist. And then the other one is that, you know, it's not realistic if it's not depressing. And so we sort of lost the balance that allowed us to get things like The Awful Truth and Designed for Living and Singing in the Rain, because things that are optimistic are no longer realistic in that sense. Yeah, and it's also like the false assumption that once you get a couple together in a long-running TV show, they lose that spark. And it, yeah, and so Tori and like have that negotiate that relationship, and we've sort of abandoned that for a little bit in a couple of TV shows. Like I'm thinking specifically about Parks and Rec. Ben Schur, as a showrunner, definitely likes getting his characters together and then having them together and get married for like 5 or 6 seasons. And that's really refreshing to me. And I think a lot of people, I think my connection is unstable, so you might have lost me for a second. So we're sort of losing that in TV a little bit, but it's definitely like common held assumption in both TV and movies. That's very frustrating, because I like to see the after effects, and like seeing how a relationship works, I think can be really instructive and interesting representations of society, because the purpose of romantic comedies is to reflect society back to us. Do I think the title of Eternal Sunshine is ironic? Probably. I think most things in this movie is ironic. I don't know. So I actually really like the poem. I mean, the segment of the poem that's in the movie. I haven't read the rest of the poem because it's like 50 pages long, but I did look it up because I was interested. But so, yeah, I think it's ironic because like the point of those, so the quote goes, how happy is the blameless vessel's lot, the world forgetting by the world forgot. So Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, each prayer accepted and each wish resigned. So it's sort of saying, it's sort of this idea of like, it must be nice to be so dumb because you're not aware of how horrible the world is around you. And so every wish is accepted, and you sort of live in this daze of not, it's sort of like this, it's sort of this ignorance is bliss sort of mentality. And I think, yeah, I think it is because what they're doing is erasing, what they're doing is technically brain damage, which is one of my favorite lines from the movie. Technically it is brain damage. But what they're doing is wiping the minds and making them spotless. And throughout the course of the movie, it's shown sort of how wrong, how wrong sort of ethically and morally that is, and how bad that is for the person, because it makes a sort of emotional sense to like want to wipe someone from your memories, but then you sort of lose all the personal growth that you had while you were with that person. And so it's a good and bad thing, right? or like it's nice to have no memories, but the memories are the important part. And like if that person leaves, then the memories are all you have left of them. So yeah, I would agree that, and the behavior returns, correct. So it doesn't really matter. So you're just doomed to make the same mistakes all over again because history will repeat itself. So not having those memories sort of doesn't really do much for you, except make life worse. So I do think that Eternal Sunshine is a bit of a, if not ironic, or I guess ironic in the sense that the movie is arguing against it. But I think that is why that quote was chosen, because it's proven to be like it's not great, to not be to not have all your faculties or not have all your memories, because your memories sort of make you who you are. So that was the philosophical discussion for the night. I don't know if you have other questions, but we're almost to the 30-minute mark. If you guys have anything to say about rom-coms in general or any of the questions like that, I really enjoyed doing this. I'm thinking of maybe doing another, not syllabus or course. I don't want to call them a course because it's not really coursework. It's not really a course. It's more malleable than that. And I'm not doing any research. So all my opinions are like my own, and like I'm not backing it up with anything. I'm just expanding on my own point of view, with no no literature or quotes to back it up. So everything I say is a theory, but it's not a theory that's really backed up by anything. That's just my disclaimer. But I might do another series, I guess. I'm thinking about it. So if you have any feedback for that, or you want to see anything in particular, or you want to talk about it, I'm definitely open to that. And otherwise, thank you for joining me. It's been a really fun, I think, 8 weeks. I don't know. It's given me something to do, which is important. And I hope it's given you something to do and some things to think about, and some nice Wednesday nights. So all that said, thank you very much, and I will see you next time. All right, good night.